Hi everyone, I'm Spursh Kesri from Developer Relations team at LambdaTest, and I'm excited to welcome you to your next session of TestMu conference. This session is going to supercharge your testing skills with a bit of AI magic. Today, we are diving into master test writing with GitHub Copilot. If you have ever wished for an extra pair of hands or a really smart assistant to help writing tests, GitHub Copilot might be just for what you need. It's like having an AI pair programmer who can turn your natural language descriptions into code snippets and test cases. In this session, Michelle Duke, developer advocate at GitHub, will walk us through how GitHub Copilot leverages machine learning to assist us with writing tests. Michelle will cover everything from basics of testing to how to use Copilot for generating test cases to automating tests. Plus, she will share some tips on prompt engineering to help you get most out of this powerful tool. Michelle is a true tech blazer, having spoken over 250 stages and organized more than 100 hackathons. With her experience in AI, tech entrepreneurship, and her role as a streamer and journalist, she is definitely someone you want to learn and hear from. So, before handing over to Michelle, feel free to pop up your questions in the Q&A chat, and we will address them in the Q&A section at the end. And don't forget to spam with your favorite emojis down below. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. That was so exciting. And do please put in emojis, respond to my questions. I probably won't have heaps of time for questions at the end. It's going to be a jam-packed session. I'm really excited. So let's jump straight into it. What are we going to cover today? First of all, we're going to cover off testing and test-driven development, why it's important and how it's part of the whole software development lifecycle. We'll also talk about automating tests as well. We'll talk a little bit about Gen AI. I won't harp on this. You've seen a lot of AI sessions today. We'll talk about what GitHub Copilot is and how it can be used for developing code and test writing. And we'll talk about how to get the most out of GitHub Copilot and that prompt engineering that you mentioned at the start too. And also how to use GitHub Copilot for testing and development. And finally, mastering tests with GitHub Copilot. I'm so excited. So first of all, testing. Pop it in the chat. I want to see, do you enjoy writing tests? And if you do, what kind of tests do you like writing? It's something that some software developers really enjoy and others dread. Some of us just love writing code and don't really want to test our code. But testing is really important. And we're going to come back to the importance of software testing. But first, let's look at this thing called the testing pyramid, also known as the testing hierarchy. So when it comes to different types of tests, we have this pyramid or this triangle. And right down the bottom, we have unit tests. Now, these are the most common tests, and it involves testing individual functions or methods of our code, hence units, to ensure that those individual functions work as expected. These are relatively easy to automate as well and can be run on a CI server. The next one when we go up the hierarchy is integration tests. This verifies that different modules work together as intended. So does the front end talk to the back end? Do different microservices work together and run together? These are a little bit more expensive to run as well. And right at the top, we have user interface tests. So these user interface or UI tests replicate user behavior. So this looks at, does the thing that we have, the service we have, does it work for what the user wants? And do they get the output that they intend to look at? So the higher up the pyramid we go, and why we have a pyramid is because the higher up we go, the more expensive our tests can get, but also the more of our tests we need. For example, we might have hundreds of unit tests down the bottom, which tests all the different types of unit tests together and looks at the different combinations and variations of those things together, and which is why we can have hundreds of them. When we look at integration tests, we might only have, say, 50 integration tests that test a few different combinations of how our functions work together and how our different things talk to one another. And right at the top, user tests, we might only have 5 different user tests that test 5 different scenarios. And we'll come back to the different types of tests within this testing pyramid as well. But first, I want to look at artificial intelligence and how we can use that for some of our test writing. So again, you've heard about this today, so I'm not going to go into it too much. What I really want to talk about is the hype around generative AI and how it's so different. So the reason generative AI is different to traditional AI, which has been around for a long time, and traditional technologies, is generative AI is probabilistic and non-deterministic. So what that means is that most technologies up until now have been deterministic. If I do X, I get Y. If I press a button, I get a response. AI and generative AI doesn't work that way. It works by being probabilistic. That means it looks at what the user has inputted and chooses the next word or sentence or piece of code based on the best educated guess. So generative AI is capable of creating things like really good prose and really good writing and documentation. So pop in the chat. I want to see if you've used some of these. If you've used ChatGPT, let me know. I'd love to see it. There's also artwork. So if you've tried out DALL-E or Stable Diffusion, maybe you've used something in Photoshop or Microsoft Designer, let us know if you've used some of these technologies. And we're now seeing a lot more programmers use artificial intelligence for pair programming. Pair programming is able to help us write code and solve some of our problems. One such tool is GitHub Copilot. So this is an AI pair programmer that's built right into your editor, and we'll talk about how it's more than just your editor as well. And it can help you suggest code, write whole functions, and understand your code. So pop in the chat. I want to see if you've used GitHub Copilot before as well, and if you're currently using it for work. And it can help you develop code by being more than just autocomplete. So it generates suggestions by being probabilistic, helping you write those lines or functions of code. And it's essentially containing the collective knowledge of all the world's developers that you now have at your fingertips. So without talking about too much, let's just jump into a demo because I like demos. I can see people in the chat are using GitHub Copilot, which is great. So to use GitHub Copilot, we first need to install and get GitHub Copilot. So here I have Visual Studio or VS Code, which is my favorite editor of choice. And we can use in other editors, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So to install it here in VS Code, I grab the extension, make sure that it is enabled, and I can see up the status there at the top. I'm ready to go, and I can start using GitHub Copilot. So this is one of the very first things that I did with GitHub Copilot when it was first launched. I was doing a JavaScript coding challenge. I was doing this live on stream as well. And in my brain, I was like, I've done JavaScript for like 9 months, can't even remember where to start. So I opened up my VS Code and popped up GitHub Copilot and wrote some comments on what I wanted this function to do. So reverse a sentence, start the new sentence with a capital, and no other sentence should be a capital, and have some punctuation as well. So I'm being very specific to GitHub Copilot and giving it some context before I started coding. And immediately GitHub Copilot gave me this function reverse sentence. So this is a good starting point for what I needed. And as I'm coding, I'm going through and writing more and more comments as well. So the way I like to look at problems is breaking them down into different components. So how does this work? How do I want to solve this problem? So I wanted to start the first letter of the sentence and start it off by making that lowercase. It wasn't. So I had a bunch of sentences and I was like, okay, well, if it's not an I, because that was the only sentence I was given. So let's make that lowercase. You can see here, I'm not just blindly accepting what GitHub Copilot is doing or is providing me either. I'm looking at what it's providing me. I'm able to type over the top if I don't want specifically what it's given me. I'm able to write more and more comments to get what I want. We can see we're getting that ghost text. So that like kind of not quite so a text there that's a little bit like grayed out. We can see that GitHub Copilot, that's a suggestion from GitHub Copilot. So I can accept that suggestion by pressing tab on my keyboard. And if I don't want that suggestion, I can continue typing over it. I can accept it and backspace it. That is actually one of my favorite ones right there, which is like provided me that regular expression. I didn't have to go look it up. I didn't have to go type in all the punctuation marks. It's just there and it's great. And so with GitHub Copilot, I'm able to either accept that suggestion, continue typing to get a different suggestion, refine it by adding more comments in, or I'm also able to accept the suggestion and then type over it to refine it a little bit more. So I think it's really important to note that GitHub Copilot is a co-pilot. It's not a pilot. It's not in charge. You're in charge. You are responsible for the code you ship at the end of the day, which means we have to look at what GitHub Copilot is giving us, and we need to analyze that and think, is this what I want? Is this correct? Don't just blindly accept what it's giving us. We can see here, finally, we've got this reverse sentence. We're joining it back together. I could have been a little bit more specific there instead of having the function called reverse sentence and also having a constant called reversed sentence. So I could have been a little bit better on my naming there. But for now, this is kind of okay. You know, it was a coding challenge. I'm having a bit of fun with this. And I thought this was pretty good when I was writing it too. I was like, this is such a great code. And I did not test this. So we're going to come back to this idea of testing it here. We can see finally GitHub Copilot's also helping me with the comments as well, not just the code. We've got these 25 lines of code that I've written in a matter of minutes with GitHub Copilot's help. Now, when we first launched this, people were blown away. They called it enchanting, mind-blowing. This is from the co-founder of Instagram. We had some of the senior software developers saying it's so good. I'm never going to develop software without it again. And I even think, how did we develop software 5 years ago without AI assistance? So I showed you some JavaScript. What we can do is we can code in all other languages as well. So here's some of the most popular languages on the internet. So GitHub Copilot supports all languages in the public corpus. Practically speaking, the quality is different based on the number of data points that we have. So the more popular the language, the better GitHub Copilot is. It's also really good at C, C++, C#, PHP, Rust. And if it's on the internet, GitHub Copilot will know a little bit about it. But as I said, more data points, more popular languages is better at. There are also GitHub Copilot supports other spoken languages as well. So I was writing comments in English, but if I wrote comments in German or Spanish or Japanese or Hindi, GitHub Copilot is able to understand that and respond as well. In terms of IDEs, I showed you VS Code. It's my favorite. We can also use Visual Studio. We can use JetBrains IDEs as well as like PyCharm Writer and NeoVim. In terms of GitHub Copilot Chat, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's supported on those first 3 IDEs. And we can see there's someone in the comments there saying, lots of comments. Yes, I like commenting my code. So GitHub Copilot isn't just available in the IDE and as that inline functionality, which I was showing you, so putting in the comment and getting the comment back. GitHub Copilot is also available as chat now as well. So this is the GitHub Copilot chat feature where I can use things like / commands, which we'll talk about in a moment. I can ask GitHub Copilot to create a new thing for me. So in this case, create a new Space Invaders game, write it in Python, play it in a browser on a game window, make the enemies red, the player blue, have a score counter. So able to provide GitHub Copilot with a lot of context. It's able to not just spit out lines of code for me, but also explain what those lines of code are doing. So you can see here, it's providing me with the code and also give me a little bit of explanation about what that does. And when it finishes with this code and providing me with the code, it also then provides a little explanation at the end. So this code does this. And also note that Pygame's not great for a web browser. You should think about using something different as well. We can also use GitHub Copilot via chat on .com. Now, this is an enterprise-only feature, but it's really cool. So I want to show you. This is a project I was looking at to showcase for the community, and it's not in English. I had no idea what it does, but GitHub Copilot is able to understand that. And I can ask what this project does, even though it's not in English, and it can respond to me in English, which is awesome. You can also use GitHub Copilot in the terminal for those developers who love using the terminal. So how do I install NPM? And GitHub Copilot can suggest to us how to do that and even help us execute those commands. And finally, we have GitHub Copilot available on mobile as well. So there's ToolJet. I can ask GitHub Copilot what this project does and can give me an overview of that. I can have a further conversation with that. So now that we've looked at the GitHub Copilot, let's look back at testing. So why is testing important? I mentioned it's important, but why? It's a normal part of the software development lifecycle, and it's important to ensure that code works as intended. If my code doesn't work too well for the JavaScript coding challenge I did, probably not the end of the world. But if I've got lots of users and customers and my code doesn't work, my product isn't able to service those, that's not a good thing. So we need to test to ensure that our code works. It saves time in the long run, and we're able to optimize our code through testing as well. So whether we're using it for JavaScript or we're testing other languages, these same principles apply. So the point of tests is to get confidence. So as our systems grow and scale, we add more functionality. We might have forgotten about a feature that we built 6 months or a year ago. And those tests are there and designed so that we don't break that original functionality. We don't break things when we add in new features. Those tests are there to help us. So some companies have dedicated software testers, so people who build the code and then people who test the code. Other companies like GitHub, we adopt the philosophy that engineers should both write their code and test their code as well. So I'm curious to know what your company does. So pop it in the chat. Now let's come back to this testing pyramid that I showed you at the start. So within this testing period, we have different types of tests. So the first one, as I mentioned, unit tests. Now they're very common. They involve testing individual units. We have this integration test in that middle part of the pyramid. And as part of integration tests, we can also have functional tests. So functional tests doesn't just check to see that the database talks to the front-end application or the front-end talks to the back-end. That's an integration test. Whereas a functional test test to see, do we actually get the correct response for the database? It might be talking to it correctly, but are we getting the response that we want? We also have end-to-end tests, who sit in that top part of the user interface test and user experience test. And those end-to-end tests can test the, say, for example, does a web page load? We could look at the entire e-commerce shopping experience, from getting onto the website to browsing, adding to our cart, and checking out. Oh, you have a test team. That's very exciting. Welcome in, testers. So, and then we can also have in that top part of the pyramid performance tests too. So these tests test how a system performs under stress. So if I have 2,000 users or 2,000 requests, how does that system respond and how does it perform? I also have smoke tests up the top as well. So smoke test to see if something is there. So for example, is there a title on the page, which means yes, the page is loading. So we won't have time to go to every single one of these tests, but let's look at a couple of them. So back to what I thought was pretty good code at the start, and I never tested this, so bad me. But if we have a look at this, we can ask GitHub Copilot chat now to explain it, to make sure it's working. Yes, it's working. We can even ask GitHub Copilot, if I wanted to test this code, what should I use? It's picked up that we've got JavaScript there, and it's saying, oh, you could use these couple of frameworks, and here's some tests for that. Now, I found out about this framework called 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐷𝑇est while I was looking for some community projects to showcase, and I wasn't sure if that was a good test, so we can ask GitHub Copilot. So I heard about 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐷𝑇est. Is that good? GitHub Copilot's like, yes, it is good. And here are some tests to do that. So that looks good. So we can tidy this up too. We'll get rid of those comments at the start because we've got the comments throughout. And we can use one of my favorite ones, which is /fix. So let's bring up the GitHub Copilot inline chat. So I can highlight the code, Control-I on the keyboard, and /fix, just fix the code. Just do the things, fix it. So now we've verified 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐷𝑇est is a good framework. GitHub Copilot can help with all kinds of frameworks as well. But here we're going to use 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐷𝑇est for this one. So we can say to GitHub Copilot, write me some tests for this function. 1 or 2 is enough. So I'm being specific there because I don't want heaps of tests that all test the same thing. But I can ask, say, 1 or 2 is enough, and that's good. I can import that into a new file, and we're good to go. Now, it's good practice when looking at testing to ask questions like, have we thought about everything? Is this test robust? So I'm going to ask GitHub Copilot, have I missed any edge cases here? And it goes, yeah, well, you've only got a couple of tests, so you've surely missed some edge cases. So here's some of those edge cases you might want to think about. Empty strings, single words, punctuation, capitalization, white space, long sentences. But cool, thank you for finding those edge cases for me. Now can you write the tests for those edge cases? And GitHub Copilot goes through and goes, yeah, here are some of those tests for those. Now, what I really like is I don't have to sit here and think about, what is a good sentence to test? GitHub Copilot comes up with this for us, which is great. So we're using ChatGPT as well. Good on you. People are using code and using AI. And we can see here, we've got those tests that we can put them into the file. We can click that insert button, which goes right in where our cursor is. Now, this looks pretty good. I've got some great examples here, like JavaScript learning and NASA uses satellites, which are really cool. So we can go here, and now we can have a look at structuring this a little. So we need to name our test, so .test.js. Now, I could also be a really good developer here and have good folder structure. I could put my tests into their own file. I haven't done any of that. We're going to show you that in the next one, but we could make that a lot better and make sure we export the function as well so we can actually use it to test. So now this is looking a lot better. We've got these files named a little bit better, and we have our tests. So let's go and run our tests. So for 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐷𝑇est, we want to use npx. So we can type in npx 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐷𝑇est in our terminal. So bring up the terminal VS Code, control backtick, and we've got our terminal. We've got 5 failed tests and 4 passing, which is not too bad. I also have this little flag above 2b, and I want to know a little bit more about that. So let's go and ask GitHub Copilot about that. Now, I also know about 2=. So I'm going to ask GitHub Copilot to explain the difference between 2b and 2=. And GitHub Copilot says, yes, those are both matches. And it's picking up that it's in Jest. Now, Jest is a similar Java testing framework for 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐷𝑇est. They use the same methods here. So we can see that one is for strict equity comparison. The other one is for deep equity. So I realized I actually want to use 2=. Here. And I have a few tests that I don't want to go and change every single 2b to 2=. So I can highlight my code there, use GitHub Copilot inline chat again and say, change all the 2b's to 2=, which this is one of my favorite things with GitHub Copilot. Like, imagine if I had hundreds of tests. Like, we've only got about 10 unit tests here, but if I had hundreds, this would take me ages to go. I could control, find, change. But GitHub Copilot can just do that for me, and it looks great, so it can accept those changes. Now we have some of our tests running. So as I'm making changes, these tests are running in the background as well. Control R, replace all done. But imagine if it's something a little bit more complex. GitHub Copilot is great there. So here I want to change some things, and I changed a few things. We're getting a few more different errors. And what I want to go and have a look at is each different problem individually. So I've got some issues here, punctuation handling, and some issues with capitalization handling. Now I went through this. I'm only going to show you the final code here, but I iterated on this with GitHub Copilot, using GitHub Copilot chat and inline and fixing the code. And I ended up on this and landed on this code. And we can go and test that. We can see all our tests are passing green, which is nice. So by using GitHub Copilot chat and inline and doing a few things with working with other developers as well, if I need to, I can ask questions to verify GitHub Copilot is correct. We got everything passing. Now, what we've lost, though, is something that I did really well at the start, which is all those comments that someone mentioned in the chat. So we can highlight the text and say, can you please write comments for this? Now, that's not something you can do with Control R, Control Find R replace. So GitHub Copilot goes, great, here's some nice comments so that I will now understand my code when I look at it. And if I share this to someone else, they will also understand their code. So this is looking a lot better, look a lot nicer. I can go and add in some extra comments there if I need as well. So some things that I've done with this is what I call prompt engineering, and what everyone in the AI general calls prompt engineering. So this is about providing good context. So prompt engineering is a process of giving very clear instructions to a program. So being specific. So in that example I showed you, we followed syntax naming conventions, like, reverse it. I could have been a little bit better with some of these naming conventions, but I was very specific about what I asked. Write me some tests for this function. 1 or 2 is enough. Write me some tests to fix this. Change the 2b's to equals. Be specific about what we want. We reviewed and changed our code along the way, and we iterated on the prompts as well. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. And we also use various methods of interacting with GitHub Copilot. So if I didn't go exactly what I want with chat, I can use the inline chat and see how that works. So here is some context for when we're working with GitHub Copilot. So working with Visual Studio or VS Code, GitHub Copilot takes context from whatever's open in the file and other open tabs. So if you're working on something similar, open those files in tabs and you'll have a little bit more context for GitHub Copilot. We can use commands as well, and I showed you a few of these. So /explain, explain my code, /documentate, add documentation comments, /test, which is a great one, which I encourage you all to try out, /fix, which we tried, love that one, just fix the code, /help to get some help, and /new, which we showed you as well. So now we know a little bit more about that. In our last 20 minutes, let's look at mastering test writing and deploying our code. So this is a real application that's working. It is an application that helps people find their lost pet. So someone can go in and submit a form to look that they've lost their pet, and someone can submit a form to say they found a pet. Image recognition matches those images and helps owners find their lost pets. So here is the README for this. It is quite an in-depth architecture. It is a very robust and diverse application that does quite a lot. So it's quite in-depth here. Now, something I want to show you now is working slightly differently. So I used VS Code before, but I don't always have my nice, big, beefy computer that I'm working on now. When I'm traveling, I often only have a laptop or a tablet. So what I want to show you now is opening something in CodeSpaces. So CodeSpaces is a fully integrated development environment that runs completely on the web. So long as you have a browser and an internet connection, you can access this. CodeSpaces is free for 60 hours per user per month. So this is really fun to try out. So we've got it here. So we've spun up our CodeSpace. This is all running in the browser. And we now, if we want to use GitHub Copilot, we need to install GitHub Copilot in here, just like we would VS Code. Go to extensions, install GitHub Copilot. I can even install themes as well. So install a different theme and use a fancy theme. Now let's have a look at some of the files here. So I can use GitHub Copilot chat to say, I don't want to look at files. Just tell me what this application does. So at Workspace tells GitHub Copilot to look at the entire workspace. So look at that, and it's giving us lots of information about the key components, what it does, some of the documentation, and we're now clicking that next prompt that GitHub Copilot has given us. So it gives us a suggested next question, which is what are the key features of this application. So we've done all that. Now let's have a look at our files. So we'll go and browse some of our files here. We've got a lovely folder structure. It's all beautifully and nicely done. We can see we've got our pages. So open up a couple of pages there. And we can go and run and debug this as well see this application working. So we can see it's installing all these things when I run, and we've got our application there opened up, and there's our lost pet form for filling something out. So now that this is working, I want to test this. As I was browsing through some of the files, I noticed someone has already written some tests here, and we've got some Playwright tests. You heard from Debbie this morning about some mastering test writing with Playwright. So hopefully it's a little bit familiar. But if it's not, we can ask GitHub Copilot, what are these tests? Explain these tests and how do I run these tests? So it's explaining there's two types of tests here. One test that if there's a title on the page, which means the page is correctly loaded, and the other test to see if that submit button goes to the correct page to submit a lost pet form. I've got here GitHub Copilot. It's giving us the instructions to run and install Playwright. So we've got this all here. We're ready to go. Let's start running some of these tests. So we can open up a terminal here as well and follow the instructions. So if we open up a terminal, backtick, control backtick, and it opens, and we can copy what GitHub Copilot is giving us and add it into terminal. The first one I run there says node and npm not found. So we can ask GitHub Copilot, how do I install node and npm? And it gives me the terminal commands to execute. And we can see here we're adding those into our terminal and executing those commands. Now we want to run our Playwright test. We can see that it is installing a few things. We don't have all the dependencies there, so it's installing the dependencies as well. And we can now go and run our tests, and both of our tests fail. Now we can look at why those tests are failing. We've got our test here, and we can see that it's not navigating to the page that I want. Now, if I go up to the test file and copy that URL and look at it in a browser, we can see the site is not being reached. So this is our actual URL. We can copy that in there, and that's the URL of this particular port I've opened here. We'll make this public as well so that Playwright can actually look at this and test against it and go and run those tests again, and they both fail. But we've got a different error. This is what I love about testing is, woohoo, progress. We've got a different error here. So let's look at this error here. Now we can see that we've got the page is loading, but the title that we're given, the title it's expected, aren't the same. We can fix that. If we have a look at that in an incognito browser, we can see that it's trying to hit this code space port, and there's a continue button there. Let's ask GitHub Copilot how we can fix that. We can highlight this, or we can ask GitHub Copilot chat. These tests are running in a code space. What do I do to fix this? Now, it didn't quite give me what I wanted in the chat here, so I'm going to highlight my code and ask GitHub Copilot inline chat. This is running in a code space. How do we click the continue button before running the test so Playwright can access it? It's given me something there. That looks pretty good. I can change it up a little bit. And now that looks a lot better. The first test is passing, so I can kill the process, add that into the second test, and away we go. And we can have a look at that, and both our tests are now passing. Yes, perfect. They are now passing. This is great. This looks good, but I don't like this repetitive code. I want to ensure that this code is a little bit better. So I can go in and ask GitHub Copilot, how do I make these tests better and more succinct? It's already understood what I meant by, I was relatively vague with that response. It's already understood what I want, and it's popped that there, and there's a little error popping up, and we can ask GitHub Copilot, why is there an error? And woohoo, it's gone through and looking at that and fixed our code for us. So we can accept that and run again if we need it. GitHub Copilot is looking good. But I also want to make sure this code is reusable. Right now, this is running orange-umbrella, which we can see up the top is the name of my code space. This is not very reusable. So if somebody else uses it, it's not going to pick up their URL. So I can ask, how does this URL, or how is this handled, and can we generate based on the URL that's generated from the code space? We can go and look at our Playwright config file as well, and we can see there is a URL there. It was commented out. We can uncomment that and put the code space's URL with the correct port 5114. We can see now all our tests are passing, which is great, which is awesome, which means that that is now working. It's picking up the code space URL, and we've got 6 tests passing this time, because the way Playwright works is it runs a test version of Chromium, Firefox, and Safari. We've got 2 tests running on 3 browsers, so that's 6 tests in full. Now, I did go and change this at the end because I didn't want to have Playwright hit the code space's URL, click continue every time. So I changed this to be localhost 5114, so that whenever we're doing development, this line, you can see line 46 is being changed. So that makes it a little bit easier, makes our test cleaner and a little bit more reusable. But for now, the rest of this demo is still at GitHub app.dev. As we can see there, it also means that in the final version, I was able to get rid of lines 3 to 7 because that's being handled in the Playwright config file. Now that we've got this all working, I can now write some tests for new functionality I want to do. Now, this is real test-driven development. We're writing the test before we go and develop something. So we do have a submit form. We haven't got any tests for that submit form. We will go and add some tests for this submit form here. And we're making sure that we add in the correct IDs that are in our lost pet razor form there. So we can go in and check, yes, we're using the correct ID there, and we can make sure it is actually named. So make sure it's correct. And we can see that our tests there are failing. So we've got, it is going to the URL, but it's expecting confirmation when it's actually getting submit. So we know that that is at least working through in terms of filling out the form. So we'll come back to fixing that submit button, but we can go through and fill out the rest of our form for the moment. We can add in an email there, and we can make sure that we've got a nice image we can test against. In the spirit of AI, I generated a picture of a dog, and we can pop that in there. Now, I don't think I need the whole file, so I can just add in fixtures/buddy there. I've done the right thing. I've put in my fixtures into my test file or my test folder, and we put the ID there so that Playwright can look at the pet image ID and test against that. Now that we've got this, we can run these tests. We can see, okay, it didn't actually find that beautiful picture of the dog I uploaded because we do actually need the entire file there. Oh, sorry, that one didn't play. We actually do need the full file there. So we do need to go and ensure that that is working. So this file is not playing. Bear with me one moment. I need to shut down PowerPoint and start once more again. Give me a moment. This has happened a couple of times. So we will make sure we are fine. And there we go. We're back up and running. So hopefully this is working now. Perfect. This does happen a couple of times. That's okay. So we're back up and running. We can see there our tests are passing there. And let's go to where we had our submit form. We can fix that to ensure that it's actually hitting the correct submit form that we want. We now have most of our tests passing, but only one is failing, which means one of our browsers isn't working. So this is the fun of cross-browser testing. So we can go and fix that by force putting the form as a method post. So basically WebKit was failing because it was using the get method instead of the post method. That's just something that Safari does. And if we force it into a post, which is putting that image into the body of the text, because the image can't go into the URL, and we can fix that there. And that is now all looking a lot better. So all our tests are passing now. Great. So we can go in now and add in that new functionality here. Let's have a look. Cool. So we've got our owners there. Now we're going to go and add in some new functionality. So GitHub Copilot thinks we've got a color there, but I want to add in a field for an owner. I also want to add in an option for a location selector, because if I lose a pet in Melbourne, Australia, probably not going to find it in Perth on the other side of Australia, and less likely to find it in America. So I want a location selector here. So now we can go in, we can change our front end to be what we want to be. So I'm going to change a bunch of these things. I want to split out the information for the pet, the information for the owner. I also want to add some more options in there for pets that we've lost. And now I want to add in that information for the owner here. So how do we get in touch with you if we do end up finding your pet for you? And make sure that we've got the correct IDs in here as well. And I want to upload an image of our pet, move that up there so it makes a little bit more sense to the user. Now I've got some red stuff, so I've got an error. We'll come back to that in a minute. The way this application works is that when we add in a new piece to our form, we also need to add in a new class and a constructor into our pet model. So add in the new ones that we added there, which is the owner name, and we also added in the location. Now, if we go back and have a look at some of these errors, we can say, what's the error here? It's saying we've used the incorrect ID attribute. So we'll go and make sure that that's okay. We'll add in a step for where did I lose my pet? So adding this drop-down selector. So I can ask GitHub Copilot as well. I want this to be a drop-down selector using that inline chat functionality for places in Australia. How cool is that? Just figured out the places for me and add in the location there, and remembering that it is case sensitive. So go and add all those constructors. Now this is all looking all right. I've got some red errors here, and that's just because it's picked up that I had 2 step 2s and I didn't have it correct there. So I can also go and tidy this up a little bit, remove the values from that drop down, so it just shows a nice clean drop down there. And that is looking great. We make sure all our IDs are correct. We've got the correct capitalization there, and we've got all our tags. Ours is looking great. So our pet model looks like it's working. Now let's go and run these tests. And we've got 9 tests running. So those 3 tests running on 3 workers, and yay, which is great. Now let's go and have a look at the website. And we can see if we go here, we've got that new functionality in here too. So we've got a drop-down location selector. I could probably tie this up a little bit and, change the headings there. So it's, what kind of pet do you have? Where did you lose it? Center it all a little bit. But for now, this is looking pretty good. Now I want to look at automation. So I've written a bunch of tests, but for now I've got to run them all myself. But when I was browsing through, I noticed that somebody's already got a GitHub YAML file here for Playwright, which means there's already a GitHub action for running these Playwright files. We can see there, line 32, it points to the directory of the Playwright tests I just wrote, which means any new tests that I write in that Playwright file are going to be added to GitHub Actions, which is awesome. So someone's already done this nicely. And now this is all looking good. We've got our action there. Let's go and make some changes to our and commit this. Now, some keen eyes will see that I had 441 commits there. Wow. So I've done some things there. I probably could have used some git ignores, but there's a whole bunch of stuff when I installed npm and node. I wasn't in the correct directory, so we can go and remove those things because we don't need those. We don't need our test files as well. We can see that our images are being uploaded there. We don't need every single one of those images every time we make a test or run a test. So I can go and add that pet images to git ignore. So copy the path and add it into our git ignore file so it is not being committed. And now our commit looks a lot nicer. We've only got 6 change files, and that looks really, really nice. So we can go and commit this. Now, I haven't got a branch here yet, so we do also need to make a branch. So we can go and push and create a branch there. So we can sync our changes, make sure we're all up to date with the main, and we can go now and create a branch, make it something meaningful, mish tests in this case. I added some tests, and be a good developer and write in a good commit message. Add new location selector, and yeah, we have a pull request, which is awesome. So our pull request is there, ready to go. And if we go and have a look at that pull request on the web, we can see it there, pet spotter test and location opened by Mish. We can go and have a look at it. We can see we do need a review, and our checks are running as well. So this is our Playwright test all running there in GitHub Actions. I have definitely sped this up because this does take a little bit longer, but this is it all running there. You can see it's running our Playwright test, and boom, right there under Playwright test, line 14, all 9 tests are passing. We should expect that because we tested it ourselves in our own editor, but the whole works on my machine, works on my code space. Doesn't always work for GitHub Actions, but this is great that it passed this time. So we can go there, we can have a look. That's all looking good. The test passed. We've got a nice green tick, and we have our checks. Everything's passing. Everything's looking good. And this is amazing. So now I've got my pull request, and then once a reviewer comes along and merges this, we'll have some new functionality. So we've done all the right things here. I showed you writing something in a code space, which hopefully not everyone has seen before. We've tested our existing tests that were already there. We wrote some new tests, then we wrote new functionality for those tests. We tested our code like good developers should. We ran our GitHub Actions against our pull request, and we have confirmed that that pull request is good to go. So this is all great. Now, why is all this important? Why is it important that we write tests? We talk about why it's important to write tests, but why is it important to use AI? Now, I think it's important to use AI because GitHub Copilot can help us write tests and make them easier and faster, which is important when we're looking at the whole software development lifecycle. People across the industry are feeling this productivity and efficiency boost too. So Accenture did a study of 450 other developers on the impact of GitHub Copilot. They looked at the activity. Developers reported staying in the flow, less time going looking for information, and which is good. Productivity, 90% of them said, "Oh, I actually wrote better code," which is good. And 88% of the code that GitHub Copilot suggested was retained. This is the one I think is really important, which is the efficiency gain. So 50% more software builds from using GitHub Copilot. Now I go, 50% more builds. Is that 50% more good builds or just 50% more builds? No, 50% more builds and 84% increase in successful builds, which is awesome. And satisfaction, developers are absolutely loving what they're doing, and they're feeling really fulfilled on the day. So this information, I will drop a link for all the resources, including the code as well, so you can go verify everything at the end. And I love this as well. So we've got some quantitative, those statistics I gave you, and qualitative here, which means I have to use, when I use GitHub Copilot, I have to think less. And when I do think, it's the fun stuff I get to think about. I don't have to sit there and think about what test should I write for this thing, or what's a good example for this test. I can spend more time doing the things I love as a developer, which is writing code, and it makes it more fun, right? Now, if we have a look at GitHub developer productivity that we're seeing from GitHub Copilot, developers are, we've got 1.5 million developers now using GitHub Copilot. 75% of them saying they're feeling more fulfilled, 55% faster coding. This is all from a research study that we did, which I'll drop a link to at the end as well. This is a mind-blowing statistic. 46% of the code now committed to the internet is written by an AI, GitHub Copilot or other, which is incredible when you think about it. We have over 50,000 businesses using GitHub Copilot for building software as well internally. That's working on proprietary code as well. Our CEO, Thomas Dohmke, said last year at 𝐊𝐞𝐲 that AI-powered developer tools, not just GitHub Copilot, will contribute $1.5 trillion to the global GDP. That's because those efficiency and productivity gains are so undeniable. It's helping making software development so much faster and more efficient. So I would encourage you all, if you haven't tried GitHub Copilot, to go and try it. I love in the chat, we've got extremely great at proposing regex. It's like it's reading your mind, but it's not reading your mind. If you haven't tried it, do go and try it. It's free for 30 days to go and try it. It is so much fun, and I would encourage you all to go and use it and give it a try. What have we covered today? We've covered quite a lot, and apologies for the PowerPoint breaking in the middle, but we still got there. We looked at the testing pyramid. We looked at generative AI and how that's the probabilistic determination it uses. Non-deterministic, it's probabilistic. Looked at some of the applications, looked at how to use GitHub Copilot and what are some of the languages and platforms it works for. We looked at the different types of testing. We showed you a couple of different tests using GitHub Copilot for 𝐌𝐢𝐜𝐻 and playwright tests. Remember, everything I showed you with GitHub Copilot can work across various testing frameworks and all kinds of testing within the hierarchy. We looked at prompt engineering, how to get the most out of your GitHub Copilot, out of your AI-powered programmer. Looked at test-driven development, why that's important. We showed you an example of that. And we talked about developer productivity as well. So my takeaways for you all today and some action points is go and try GitHub Copilot. It's super fun. I'm glad people in the chat are saying they love the demo. So thank you so much. And so go and try it. It's really fun. Embrace test-driven development. So embrace the idea of thinking about what you want to write, writing the test for it, and then writing the functionality for it. That means they're really being intentional about what we build and what we create. Practice good prompt engineering. If we don't get exactly what we want the first time, refine it. Try something different. Try using inline chat. Try using comments. Good testing practices, having a good folder structure, putting our tests in a folder, having a fixtures file for our testing information like images and things, and ensuring that we test and have automation alongside. So we're able to, the tests I showed you and the demo I showed you, we were able to use it alongside our existing CI. So in this case, we have GitHub Actions, and I was able to create tests alongside that without reinventing the wheel. So I would encourage you all, go and experience some of this productivity boost from GitHub Copilot. And also come and join us at GitHub Universe later this year. So if you like this, there'll be so much more of this stuff, lots of cool demos and lots of cool people to interact with. GitHubUniverse.com. Come and join us. You can join us in person in San Francisco or join us online as well. As promised, here's the resources, and I will drop this link in the chat as well. So grab this, and I will, if that doesn't work, I'll do that in a second. So grab the resources. So gh.io and /tm24. There's all the resources there. And if you do have questions, because we are out of time for questions, please feel free to follow me on socials, drop a message. I would be more than happy to answer any questions you have, because we are pretty much at time. I've really enjoyed watching everyone in the chat. So thank you so much for this. And I'm glad everyone has been enjoying GitHub Copilot and using it. And yes, I will provide all that information is there for those ones saying, is the information correct? So again, thanks to everyone for being here. thanks to the team for having me, and thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. GitHub Copilot was very interesting, and the use cases, I think a lot of people are going to try it today. Uh, just picking up some Q&A questions from the chat. There were a lot of questions that you covered in your talk, but I think a lot of people should give it a try, and they will understand how it can be like added to their day-to-day workflows, and how it can help you write uh, as an helping hand to write your test cases and write your code. So just one interesting question. When would you not suggest Copilot to give us a better idea, and when and where we can use it freely without much consequences?
Yeah, I think what it's really important to understand is GitHub Copilot is a pair programmer, so you need to work with it. So when we're talking about when it was a good idea not to use it, I think we need to think about, what do I want this application to do, and think about, before just jumping in and going straight into GitHub Copilot. Like, for example, when we looked at the JavaScript one I did right at the start, I didn't just open up the file and go, write me a whole thing that does this. It was like, okay, let's think about how I'd want to build this out. And I think that's really important, is not just jumping straight onto the tools, in the same way that if we're starting up a new project, if we're writing a new function, we're writing a new application, we usually don't, and we shouldn't just open up an editor and start writing lines of code. And everyone's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm writing lines of code. I'm writing this thing. No, we would take a step back, look at, what do we want to do? How do we want to plan this? How do we want to go through the steps? Who do we need to involve? So I think using that as an opportunity to go, let's take a step back, let's look at everyone in the team, hear from everyone in the team, and then think about adding GitHub Copilot rather than just diving straight in. I mean, if you're going to go and try it, please just dive straight in and give it a go. But if you're working on something that's important, a project, take that step back before you go diving into all the tools, is what I would suggest.
Definitely. Thank you, Michelle. Just one last question. Just picking up on screen. Is there any command for descriptive method, variable, etc. naming for those of us NT comment folks who prefer to use a code as descriptive itself where possible?
Yeah, I think like that first demo I showed was a lot of comments, because that was the way that I was working with GitHub Copilot. That was also well before GitHub Copilot Chat was available. So I think now, by using GitHub Copilot Chat, you can do a lot more coding without having those comments. So when I showed you right in the middle of when I was building out that the test for the JavaScript function, at the end of it, I didn't have any comments in it, because I was using GitHub Copilot Chat without comments, right? So I was just talking to the AI, and then I added in the comments later. So rather than being a specific command, use the chat feature, so that the chat and the inline chat, rather than writing each comment out and going through GitHub Copilot that way. So there's multiple ways you can use GitHub Copilot now, which is really fun for people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle, for the fantastic session and demo. We all learned a lot about how to make the most of GitHub Copilot for writing and automating tests.
I'm really glad everyone loved the demo too. And in that link, there's the link to all the demo code as well, so you can go have a look around with it and play with it yourself.
Thank you so much. Also, the session is recorded, so if you want to go over it again, you can just go to our YouTube channel and just watch it again, try it yourselves. And thank you all for joining. Thank you all for joining. Hope you enjoy the rest of TestMu conference. Have a great day.
Thank you everyone so much.